Your father isn't well, Elena. You need to come home. Now. Those were the first words I heard from my mother in over 3 years. No greetings, no explanation, just urgency, sharp and measured, like she was reciting lines from a script I'd never read. I stood in the middle of a quiet research lab in Montreal, my gloves still on, a centrifuge humming beside me, its rhythm suddenly drowned out by the rush in my ears. Outside, the snow was falling gently, but inside, I felt something more chilling move through me. She told me it was serious, that time was running out, that if I didn't return soon, I might miss something important. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. But there was something in her tone that pierced through my instincts and, against all logic, against everything history should have taught me, I listened. So I left. 2 layovers, 12 hours of travel, and 1 Uber ride later, I found myself in front of the house I hadn't returned to since the day I walked away without a backward glance. The porch light still flickered. The screen door still whined like it resented being touched. And when my mother opened it, she didn't look worried. She looked composed, almost rehearsed. "Elena," she said, embracing me like we hadn't last communicated through stiff, distant emails. "You made it. That's all that matters." Her voice was smooth, too smooth. Each syllable felt planned, as if she'd said it a dozen times before I arrived. I followed her through the hall that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old habits. No equipment, no sign of distress, just the sound of low music playing from the din. Then he stepped out. My father. Not on a stretcher. Not in a chair. Standing, clean-shaven, wearing his usual wool cardigan. He looked at me and smiled. "You look like you've been working too hard," he said, casual as ever. I couldn't reply. I didn't need to, because everything inside me had gone still. This wasn't a visit of concern, it was something else entirely, and when I saw the stack of papers on the table, with my full name neatly typed at the top, I realized what they truly needed from me. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't connection. It was consent. I didn't sit down right away. Something about the way my father stood so calmly in the middle of the living room made me pause. He wasn't fragile. He wasn't recovering. He looked well. Relaxed, even. My mother motioned to the couch with her usual tight-lipped smile, like she expected me to fall neatly into place. But I remained standing, clutching the strap of my bag like it was a tether to my own reality. "I thought something serious had happened," I finally said. My voice was level, but I could already hear the cracks forming beneath it. My father tilted his head. "It is serious," he said. "That's why we needed you here. We didn't want to alarm you." The way he said it, measured, logical, might have worked on someone else. But I'd grown up in this house. I knew the pauses, the phrasing, the way they wrapped manipulation in calmness. My eyes drifted to the table where a stack of documents rested neatly beside a black pen. It wasn't just paperwork, it was an arrangement. One I hadn't agreed to. "Why's my name on those?" I asked, already knowing the answer. My mother stepped in, smoothing her blouse like it was her nerves she was pressing down. "It's just a simple authorization. A power of representation, nothing binding. Just a formality so things can move more smoothly." Her voice had that same soothing tone she used when I was younger and questioning why she'd taken money from my savings just for a bit. Back then, I believed her. Back then, I didn't know better. I didn't respond. I simply walked toward the table and flipped the top document. It wasn't simple. It wasn't informal. It was a full delegation of control over a research patent. My patent. Co-owned by the company I'd helped build from scratch overseas. The form gave full authority to transfer, license, and liquidate my portion, without needing further consent. I looked up slowly. "This is my work." My voice was calm, but colder now. "This is everything I've built the last 6 years." My father sighed, as if I was being dramatic. "And we're just trying to protect it," he said. The company's going through a difficult transition. Investors want security. You've been away. We had to make quick decisions. Quick decisions, apparently, that didn't involve me, until a signature was needed. I took a slow breath and set the papers back down, carefully, like they might burn through the wood if I let them sit too long. You could have called me, I said, voice steady. You could have sent this to my attorney, but instead you told me it was urgent, that something had happened to Dad. My mother shifted her gaze toward the window. It was the only way you'd come. That sentence hung in the air, bare and unapologetic. It wasn't regret, it was strategy, revealed plainly. For a moment I didn't speak, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I knew if I responded too soon, it would come out as noise. Instead, I looked at both of them and realized something I hadn't dared consider before. This wasn't a family discussion. It was a presentation, and I wasn't the daughter coming home. I was the final obstacle to their plan. My father walked to the sideboard and poured himself a glass of water, like we were talking about taxes, not the rights to a project that bore my name. Elena, this isn't personal, he said. It's just timing. If we don't show stability now, the whole deal falls apart, and everyone suffers. I nearly laughed. Everyone? Or just the two of you who leveraged your roles as board members to create a phantom crisis? I kept that thought to myself, for now. I asked to see the investor briefings, the financials, the documentation that supposedly proved this urgency. My mother hesitated. They're sensitive, she said, her tone suddenly careful. You're not on the board anymore, I nodded. That's right, because I left, voluntarily, after you both declined my ethics report regarding internal data misuse. That stopped them cold. For the first time, my father's jaw tensed. My mother's smile disappeared completely. There it was. The real reason I was back in this house wasn't to help them navigate a transition. It was to erase a liability. That evening, I stayed in my childhood room, though nothing about it felt familiar. The walls had been repainted, the bookshelves cleared, even the bedspread replaced with something beige and forgettable. It was a room made for a guest, not a daughter. I unpacked slowly, not because I had much with me, but because I needed the time to think. Every detail since my arrival felt calculated, right down to the scripted warmth in my mother's voice and the absent concern in my father's eye. I opened my laptop and connected to the hotel Wi-Fi I had discreetly paid for, not trusting the home network. Within minutes, I was inside the company's recent filings, documents the public could access, but only if they knew where to look. Something didn't add up. The board had recently restructured. 2 members had resigned. A new investor had taken a silent stake. Anonymous, but significant. And the biggest shift. All licensing rights to the medical technology I'd co-designed had been moved to a temporary holding entity in Nevada. That wasn't just unusual. It was a classic stall move. You transfer assets temporarily when you're preparing to either hide something or lose it. The next morning, I requested a meeting with the family's legal representative. Mr. Ansell, a man who had known me since I was a teenager and who always spoke in careful, clipped sentences. When he saw me walk into his office, his posture straightened. I didn't waste time. Do I still own the 32% stake I signed 6 years ago? I asked. He blinked once. Legally, yes, but there are complications. I leaned forward. Such as? He hesitated. You were declared inactive. The board passed a clause enabling temporary delegation of shareholder rights during extended absence. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. And who drafted that clause? He said nothing, which meant everything. I left the office with my questions unanswered, but my suspicions confirmed. This wasn't about a family company in transition. It was about leverage. My name, my credentials, my work, they were holding on to them like collateral, and they needed my signature to finish what they'd started. I could almost see it now, a quiet transfer of control, a licensing deal hidden in footnotes, a payout just large enough to silence me, followed by a press release that painted them as visionaries who secured the future of breakthrough medical research. But I wasn't that girl anymore. The one who swallowed discomfort for the sake of keeping the peace. The one who accepted closed doors and unanswered questions. I had learned the hard way that silence protects nothing but secrets. That night, I printed everything: board resolutions, transfer notices, shareholder amendments, and spread them across the bed like puzzle pieces. Patterns emerged, names repeated, timelines overlapped too neatly. There was even an internal memo marked confidential that referenced a meeting I was never invited to, outlining how to streamline control of dormant equity. Dormant. That's what they called me. Not gone, not irrelevant, just idle. A tool left on the shelf until it was needed again. I didn't sleep. I documented everything. Give me a screenshot. Downloads, notes. By sunrise, I had a plan. They wanted my signature. What they didn't realize was I had already signed something far more powerful: my decision to fight. I didn't confront them right away. That would have been too easy for them, too expected. Instead, I made calls. First to a contact at the licensing office, someone I'd met during my fellowship years ago. Then to a quiet, discreet firm that handled intellectual property audits for cross-border ventures. I kept my questions simple, hypothetical, but every answer I got painted the same picture. If the board had acted without full shareholder consent, the transfers wouldn't hold under scrutiny, especially not international scrutiny. At breakfast, I joined my parents at the table as if nothing had changed. My mother offered coffee, and my father asked about the weather in Montreal. I smiled politely and gave vague answers, all while wondering how many steps they thought ahead. Probably 3, maybe 4. I had already moved to 6. They didn't know I'd already emailed myself every internal document I could recover from their cloud accounts. They didn't know I'd forwarded those emails to an encrypted drive overseas. "Have you thought more about the papers?" my father asked between bites of toast. I set my cup down. "I have, but I want to fully understand the implications first. This isn't just about company structure. It's about international compliance." He looked annoyed, but my mother stepped in quickly. "Of course, take your time. We only want what's best. For everyone." That line again. Smooth, practiced, like a polished veneer over a hollow surface. Later that day, I drove to the office of a retired partner from a firm I once interned for. She greeted me with no small talk, just a raised eyebrow and the words, "How deep are you in it?" I told her everything. She listened, then leaned back, her fingers tapping the arm of her chair. "It's recoverable," she said, "but only if you stay 3 steps ahead. Don't warn them. Document. Lock it down. Then move." I nodded. That night, I filed the first of 3 provisional holds through the licensing body, quietly flagging the patents in question as under dispute. Not public, not aggressive, but enough to freeze any deal they were planning. By the end of the week, I had a full audit request filed through a legal proxy in Quebec. The documents wouldn't link back to me directly, not at first, but it would send a quiet ripple through the structure my parents thought was airtight. The moment they received a compliance inquiry, they'd know someone was watching. They just wouldn't know it was me. I wanted them off balance, second-guessing, because that's when the cracks show, and when the truth starts slipping out. Back at the house, things remained strangely cordial. My mother cooked dinner like it was the holidays, laying out the good china and folding napkins like origami. My father asked about Elijah, my godson, like he remembered anything beyond a photo he saw once 3 years ago. It was all performance, a house of glass pretending to be stone. But I played along. I asked about their foundation gala. I smiled at their garden plans, and all the while I was taking notes. One afternoon, I asked to visit the office. "Just to say hello," I said sweetly. They hesitated. "It's a construction zone," my father replied quickly. "Nothing to see yet." That's when I knew something was being buried. Offices in transition don't need silence. They need transparency. I called in a favor to a friend at a regulatory body, asked if any changes had been filed on the premises listed under our family company's name. The report came back with a new address. Different zip code. Different district entirely. They were moving without notice. I drove there the next day under the excuse of meeting an old professor for coffee nearby. What I found was a nearly empty space with just one door labeled temp storage, a single clerk at the front desk. When I asked about Crew's Biomedical, he blinked. They were here, left 2 days ago, said they were finalizing remote operations. I thanked him and stepped outside, the wind colder than I remembered. This wasn't just transition, it was disappearance in motion. That night I confronted them, not with accusations but with questions. Simple ones, strategic. Why did the company move its headquarters? I asked over dinner. My mother paused mid-bite. My father looked at her before answering. Efficiency. The new space is more modern, easier to maintain. I nodded. Interesting. I stopped by. Didn't see much, just a clerk in an empty office. Silence, not long, but enough. I'd pressed the bruise, and it had flinched. They recovered quickly, of course. They always did. My father laughed and said, "We just haven't moved in yet. You know how slow commercial build-outs can be." My mother added, "We thought you'd appreciate the surprise." It was almost graceful, the way they danced around the truth. But they were a beat behind now. For once, I was setting the rhythm. The next morning, a message pinged through my encrypted account. The audit inquiry had reached their legal office. No response yet, but the alert confirmed what I'd hoped. They were stalling, not correcting. That meant they were still planning something, and that they hadn't anticipated resistance. Not from me, not from anyone who once walked away quietly. I began working through the night again, like I used to in the early days of the lab. Headphones on, blue light spilling across stacks of files. But this time, I wasn't building research. I was reconstructing motive. I mapped email chains, flight logs, donation receipts, and patterns of movement. That's when I found it. An expense report labeled Client Hospitality from a month before I returned. The cost? A single executive suite, rented under my name. I'd never booked it, never stayed in it. But there it was, attached to a wire transfer signed by my mother. They hadn't just kept me in the dark. They had impersonated me. I printed the receipt and stared at it for a long time. The date matched the day my mother first called. The room had been booked in a city I hadn't visited in over 2 years, under credentials linked to my old university account. Something only a handful of people could access. It wasn't just careless, it was intentional, designed to create a paper trail that could later be pointed to as consent, or at least involvement, a setup. Not loud, not dramatic, just clean enough to pass unnoticed, unless someone was looking for it. The next day, I returned to the office of the retired partner, Linda. I laid the file in front of her. "They're not just using my name," I said. "They're preparing to shift liability onto it." She nodded slowly. "Then you have 2 options. Confront now and risk them doubling down, or finish collecting and file first." I chose the second because this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about precision. Within 48 hours, I had submitted a sworn declaration to an oversight committee in Quebec, naming the timeline, the forged usage, and the misrepresentation tied to my credentials. It wasn't a lawsuit. Not yet. But it opened a channel that could freeze asset transfers, pending review. Quiet. Surgical. Just like they liked to operate, only now it was being used against them. I didn't say anything at home. I went to breakfast. I smiled. I asked about the garden. But I watched as my father's phone buzzed 1 too many times. I noticed how my mother's hands fidgeted when she thought no one was looking. They knew something had shifted. They just didn't know where it had landed. That night, I stood in the hallway outside my old room, staring at the reflection in the glass. Not the girl who'd left, not the woman they expected, but someone else entirely. Not reactive, not afraid, prepared. 3 days passed before the first real crack showed. My father was pacing the kitchen, phone pressed too tightly to his ear, voice lower than usual. "Yes, I understand," he said. "We'll handle it internally." He didn't know I was nearby, just around the hallway, listening quietly. "No, she hasn't said anything, but she's..." Different. That made me pause. He was right. I was different. Not angry, not chaotic, just aware. And done pretending. At lunch, my mother asked if I'd considered extending my stay. It would mean a lot to your father, she said, eyes fixed on the salad she'd barely touched. I smiled. Actually, I've booked my return flight. Things are waiting for me in Montreal. Her lips tightened. Of course. She tried to recover quickly. Just don't forget where your roots are. I didn't flinch. I haven't. That's exactly why I know when something's poisoned the soil. That night, I received a call from Ava, a former colleague who'd left the company a year before I did. Elena, someone's asking questions, she said. External auditors. They're asking about your involvement in licensing contracts, specifically if you ever signed off on any agreements from last year. I confirmed I hadn't. She exhaled slowly. Then something's off because your name appears twice in internal memos. It looks pasted in. The next day, I visited the Regional Ethics Bureau, quietly. I submitted copies of the altered memos alongside notarized logs from the dates in question, showing I was out of the country and had no access to internal systems. The officer, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s, flipped through the files, her brow creasing more with each page. This isn't just unauthorized use, she said at last. It's systematic misrepresentation. There will be an inquiry. I nodded. That's all I ask. Back home, the air had shifted. My father was suddenly unavailable. My mother took more calls behind closed doors. Their questions became more careful. Have you spoken to anyone about the company? She asked once, pretending to fold laundry. Just a few old colleagues, I replied. She nodded, but her hand stilled on a towel for a beat too long. They knew. They just didn't know how much I knew. The email came in at 6:17 a.m. from a legal division I hadn't heard from in months. The subject line was simple: Notification of Preliminary Review. I opened it slowly, almost reverently. The language was formal, cold, even, but the meaning was clear. An external inquiry had been triggered. My name was now formally tied to the investigation, not as a participant. As a potential victim, I stared at the screen, heart steady. It was happening. Later that morning, I joined my mother in the sunroom. She was watering the plants, her movements too deliberate to be natural. I sat across from her and asked, "Have you heard from the ethics board?" She froze mid-pour, then recovered with a smile too quick to be real. "No, why would I?" I shrugged gently. "Just wondering." A friend mentioned they were reviewing licensing procedures. It's probably nothing. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down the watering can. That afternoon, I received another update, this time from Ava. "You're not going to like this," she warned, "but your father authorized a backdated shareholder vote last spring. It gave him provisional control over your shares. He claimed you were unreachable." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. "That vote wouldn't be valid without documentation," I said. "Exactly," she replied, "and guess who signed that form?" I didn't answer. We both knew. It was my name. Again. The next move had to be public. Quiet power had gotten me this far, but exposure was now the only path forward. I drafted a formal statement for the ethics committee, clearly outlining the sequence of events, attached with digital timestamps, flight confirmations, and third-party verifications. It wasn't emotional. It was clean, unshakable. I pressed send just before dinner. At the table, I watched them carefully. My father asked about my flight again. My mother tried to talk about local charity events. But I could feel the weight in the room shifting. They were no longer steering. They were waiting. And they didn't know I had just pulled the lever. The next morning, my mother knocked on my door before breakfast. "We need to talk," she said, her voice unusually flat. I followed her to the study, where my father was already seated, arms crossed. On the table between us was a folder, thick, official-looking, marked with a law firm's crest I recognized. She slid it toward me like a peace offering. "This outlines a new proposal," she said. To clarify and formalize your role. To clean things up. I didn't reach for it. You mean to fix what you already started without me? My father exhaled through his nose, clearly frustrated. This isn't helping anyone, he said. We're under scrutiny now. Investors are nervous. The board is watching. You think this makes you look powerful? You look reckless. I smiled faintly. Funny, that's exactly what your last email said. Except it wasn't to me, it was about me. His eyes narrowed. I laid out a single page from my own folder, an official response from the Oversight Committee acknowledging procedural violations. The air shifted. My mother's eyes flicked to the document like it might catch fire. My father stayed quiet. You forged my name, I said calmly. You created a paper trail to justify removing me from something I helped build. And when that wasn't enough, you used my silence to sell your version of the truth. They didn't deny it, not fully. Instead, my mother said, "We thought you'd thank us. You were burning out. You needed a break." I nodded. And you needed a scapegoat. I stood then, folder in hand. This conversation is no longer private. I've given everything to counsel. The inquiry is real. The penalties are real. The silence is over. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the door. But as I walked out of the study, something deep inside me settled. For the first time in years. Not revenge, not even justice. Just the sound of the truth finally breathing. That afternoon I packed my things. Not because I was retreating, but because the house had already stopped being home long ago. Every hallway echoed with quiet negotiations I hadn't agreed to. Every framed photo on the walls told a version of my story that no longer belonged to me. As I zipped my suitcase, I found a note tucked into the drawer by my bed. My mother's handwriting, just 3 lines. We only wanted to protect you. You never understood how heavy it is to carry the legacy. Please don't destroy what we built. I folded it once and slipped it into my bag, not because I believed it, but because part of me needed to remember what manipulation disguised as care could look like. Legacy. That was the word they always clung to, as if protecting the company meant compromising the people who built it. As if erasing me was noble. I called Ava on the way to the airport. It started, I told her. They're already circling their version of the story. She sighed. Then it's a good thing we documented everything. Are you ready? I looked out the window at the passing trees, the sky wide and steady above. I've never been more ready. On the plane, I opened my laptop and reread the last statement I submitted. My name, my timeline, my evidence. It was all there, solid and quiet, not a scream, not a scandal, just truth, placed carefully where it could no longer be ignored. And as the wheels lifted from the runway, I felt it, not relief, not pride, but clarity. They had tried to write me out, but I was rewriting everything. Back in Montreal, I walked into my lab like I never left. The air smelled of coffee, solvents, and something else I'd almost forgotten. Focus. My assistant, Janine, looked up and smiled. "You okay?" she asked gently. I nodded. Better than okay. And I meant it. I didn't tell her about the hearing date, or the subpoenas that had already started to arrive at my parents' legal address. I didn't need to. That chapter was writing itself now. The Oversight Committee had fast-tracked the review. Evidence of procedural violations, conflicts of interest, digital inconsistencies that raised flags on everything from licensing deals to retroactive board decisions. It wasn't a scandal, yet. But it was no longer private. And in that quiet transition, power shifted. No courtroom drama, no headlines, just the slow, irreversible weight of consequence settling where it belonged. Then came the call from the committee liaison. "We've concluded preliminary findings," she said. "Your rights were infringed. The documents submitted under your name do not meet verification standards. You remain the registered owner of your stake." I thanked her without letting my breath tremble. After she hung up, I just sat there for a long time. Not smiling, not crying. Weeks passed, then months. I received one letter from my mother, handwritten, apologetic in tone, vague in content. She didn't mention the company. She talked about the garden, the weather, my father's health. I read it once, folded it gently, and placed it in the same drawer where her last note still sat. I didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. Instead, I started something new. A small initiative, just a few grants for young scientists whose voices were often drowned by corporate noise. No press releases, no branding, just a quiet space where good ideas could grow without needing to be stolen or signed away. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't redemption. It was reclamation. And for me, that was enough. They tried to turn my silence into permission. They tried to make absence look like agreement. But I spoke. I stayed. And I stood, not to destroy what they built, but to rebuild what they erased. They thought I would walk away like before, quiet, composed, carrying my silence like a resignation letter. They mistook my absence for weakness and my stillness for surrender. They believed that by erasing my voice from the rooms I helped build, I would simply fade from the record. But what they never understood was this: my silence was never approval, it was restraint. And when you mistake restraint for permission, you build your power on borrowed ground. So when I returned, not to argue, but to reclaim, they didn't know how to look me in the eye anymore. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't drag anyone into a spotlight they created for themselves. I chose something harder, slower. I chose to document, to hold the line, to bring light into rooms that had grown too used to closed doors. And when the truth finally stepped forward, it didn't need to shout. It simply stood still, undeniable. They didn't just lose access to what I had created. They lost the illusion that I could be rewritten, that I was optional, that my name didn't carry weight. The real victory wasn't the reinstated ownership or the halted deals. It was the stillness that followed. The first time in years, I could stand in front of a mirror and not brace myself for erasure. I didn't need an apology. I didn't even need an explanation. Because in the end, what they tried to take from me wasn't money or credit. It was clarity, and that was the one thing they couldn't forge. Clarity came back to me the moment I decided to stand, not to fight, but to remain, to stay. And staying, I realized, was the bravest thing I'd ever done.